Happy Friday. Football is back. The long trip to Cardiff awaits us. Well, we're making our journey down starting later on today, but let's get into some transfer news. Adam Harvey joined by Connor Southwell and Sam Seaman. I suppose the most pertinent point to start is the Chilean link that came out last night. I'll come to you, Connor, on this one. It's a 22-year-old by the name of Marcelino Nunes. He made his Chilean debut as well internationally in September last year as well against Colombia. So he has got a little bit of a profile there and looks like he'll match all the Brexit regulations and all those that are needed and now to bring a player into England. So I'll go to you and just basically saying whereabouts we are with that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. This is definitely one that we understand to be on the cards. Sort of varying levels of how progressed it is depending on who you're speaking on. So I think in general terms we'll say that Norwich are working very hard on bringing Marcelino Nunes into the club, into that kind of third midfield role that has been vacated by Pierre Lees-Malou. And of course, we know that they've stepped up their South American operations in Brazil, probably most headline grabbing worthy. There we go, if I can speak. But they've also extended out to parts of South America and North America as well, including the MLS, which is where, as I'm sure we'll come on to, Ismail Kone was someone of interest as well. So it's clearly an area that they feel they can find exceptional value in, and that they can feel they can find real talent in. And they hope that this will be another example of that. So reports in Chile at the moment are talking about, I think it's €4 million, isn't it? A deal that's been agreed. They're expecting him to sign mid part of next week, although they do play tomorrow, and he is expected to be involved at this stage. We've heard nothing on the contrary to that. So I think they kick off at 11 o'clock. We'll still be on the road back from Cardiff at that point, so I'd imagine we'll be monitoring it pretty closely. But that's where we are. Norwich definitely like him. He's a player of interest. They definitely want to bring him in. Dean Smith didn't bat it away when we put it to him today, so that's probably as close as you're going to get from confirmation from him, I felt. And I think all being well, they're hoping that Marcelino Nunes will be their fourth summer signing in the week ahead.
Obviously, any questions you guys have got, put that in the comments section on whatever platform you're watching. I'll come over to you, Sam. Obviously, I don't know if you've delved onto the highlight reel that I was watching last night. A lot of nice little sort of flicks and tricks, and looks like a real athletic midfielder, which obviously we know that's the sort of midfielder that Dean Smith wants. Obviously, that's why they brought Gabriel Sara to the club, and it feels like Lees-Malou, even despite the fact he wanted to play top flight football, maybe didn't fit that athletic bracket that Dean Smith likes in a midfielder. So have you had a chance to delve into that, and what could he potentially bring in terms of, well, one, positionally, and two, also just what could he bring to the Championship and Norwich City Football Club?
I haven't gone too far into the YouTube highlight reel rabbit hole as of yet, but I've seen little bits, and I've seen a lot of people talking on social media. Saw him compared to Emi Buendia, actually, which is always a good sign, but be careful. I think the thing that I noticed is there's a lot of energy. He's only 5'8", so he's not that sort of, physically he's not very imposing. But it shows you that when Dean Smith talks about sort of athleticism, physicality, he's not just talking about players that are massively muscular or tall. It's also sort of running stats. He's actually spoken a lot about Gabriel Sara's running stats and how impressed they are by those. It shows that he's not just interested in the sort of the size of players, but in how long they can go for a high percentages of effort and sort of speed, things like that. And I think that sort of energy is what impressed me about seeing the highlight reel. I think those are the sorts of things you have to maybe look for when you're watching those sorts of things. But no, I'm looking forward to delving into Y Scout, which is the sort of scouting platform we have access to, and having a little bit more of a look, because they'll be digging far deeper than those sort of highlight reels and looking at some advanced stats and data that I'm sure we're not even aware of yet. So they're obviously very happy with the possibility of bringing him in, and he looks like the sort of player that will add quality to Norwich's midfield, and hopefully a little bit of creativity, which they've been sorely lacking for a good while now.
just referencing what Dean Smith said this morning, Connor, in terms of Norwich City are delving into those markets where maybe they're a little bit less saturated and maybe other clubs aren't looking. Obviously, we had that link with the Ismail Kone earlier on in the week. But in terms of this guy, obviously a lack of championship experience, is that maybe a concern in terms of Norwich City and moving forwards? Obviously, we know that the championship's quite a physical league and notoriously quite difficult in terms of the level of grind, just week in, Tuesday, Saturday. Is that maybe a concern, or do you feel like maybe based on sort of the hearings you've heard that maybe he's got that possibility to adapt to the championship quite quickly?
I don't really see it as a problem, if I'm honest. I think of two Chilean midfielders off the top of my head, Gary Medel, who did very well in European football, and obviously the big one is probably Arturo Vidal. Obviously, I'm not putting him up to those standards, but it shows it can be done. Players can be taken from South America and polished into kind of players that can compete on a European stage. Now, what's interesting around kind of Sara, to link that to this, is that there's no inclination from Dean Smith that there's going to be kind of a bedding in period like we saw with Emi Buendia, who had come from sort of the second division in Spain, but obviously originally from Argentina. There's no suggestion that actually supporters are going to have to wait a long time before they see Gabriel Sara, and it's almost going to be kind of drip fed into him before he can kind of fully adapt to the league. So they will have done a lot of studies around that. I remember speaking to someone last year around their work in the South American market, and they said that's probably one of the big imponderables, really, the fact that you're taking someone from, in Sara's case, Sao Paulo, and Nunez's case from Chile, and dropping them into Norfolk, which is a completely different culture, completely different football, style of football, intensity of football as well, attention on football. All of these things take a little while to get their head around, possibly, but it depends on the character, because, you know, as we know in kind of everyday life, different people adapt to different situations at their own pace. So he may, if of course it does get done and he does become a Norwich City player, he may come in and really storm in and look brilliant. On the flip side, that Sara might take a bit more time. It might be kind of a flip of that, reverse of that. Both could take time. I mean, it's kind of this element that we don't really know about. And I mean, in terms of footballing ability, it all looks very positive, I think. I mean, I've kind of been delving into some of those numbers that Sam says a little bit this morning. Someone who likes a lot of shots, who gets stuck in, plays with real intensity. In many ways, has quite a similar profile to Gabriel Sara, which again is interesting because of the way Dean Smith is attempting to set his team up in terms of more athleticism, more sort of kind of dynamic midfield, a midfield that presses and supports both phases of play. Takes a wicked free kick as well, from what I've seen. There's one goal which I'm sure is probably, I haven't watched any of the highlight reels because I tend to stay away from them just for that reason, because a player is either brilliant or terrible on them. You can't really get any kind of measure on them. But there was one goal in particular where it kind of sets up for him nicely, and he hits it on the left foot on the volley, which is just an unbelievable goal. Quite similar actually to Tetty's against Sunderland, I think, all those years ago. So that's good. And you know, I think these elements are all going to be really interesting. And that's kind of what's going to be interesting about this South American experiment for Norwich City, because this would be their second recruit from that market. Obviously, they want the Kone as well, so it wouldn't have been averse to heading to North America. But if these two come across and do really well and prove that actually that adaptation period can be minimalized, providing you find the right character and put them in the right environment and right setting, then actually I think that opens up a whole new market to Norwich City and two really whole new continents for them. So, I think it's going to be exciting to see what happens if he does arrive and how quickly he takes to adjust. But I certainly say no issues as to why a player from South America, Chile, Brazil, Sara and Nunez can't adapt to the league. It just might take a bit more time than perhaps someone like an Isaac Hayden, for example.
Obviously, earlier in the week, Sam, we had the link that came through Fabrizio Romano that Norwich City were linked to this Canadian midfielder, Kone. Obviously from the MLS, a bit of an unknown product, not played many appearances, only I think it's 16 appearances in his professional career, obviously only 20 years of age. Was that maybe one that you saw as a bit of a surprise coming from that region? Obviously, maybe a little bit of a lack of experience, particularly coming into the Championship, which obviously is typically quite a grueling league to deal with. Are you maybe disappointed that deal's maybe not gone ahead? It looks like other sort of clubs have managed to get in ahead of Norwich, or maybe are you more positive now that this link surfaced, link into Nunez?
Well, you referenced it at the start of your question. I think the fact that it came through Fabrizio Romano probably told you at that point that it wasn't something to get particularly invested in. Obviously, our understanding was that he was a player that they were interested in and pursuing up until very recently, a potential deal for him. But the fact that they've obviously developed things and moved on to Nunez as quickly as they have shows you how much they plan ahead in these scenarios and how long their list is and how ready they are to move on to the next sort of players. So I don't think it's one of those things. I think it's just one of those things which you have to sort of get used to. I'm sure there are a lot of these sort of situations going on behind the scenes, but obviously somebody either at Montreal or in Kone's camp fancied maybe a little bit more money than Norwich were willing to pay, or a slightly better career move than they could have provided the player. And they've chosen the right avenue to go for it, really, because Norwich have ended up being priced out. I think the fact that they've got Nunez close, or relatively close, that's as far as I want to commit to a deal this quickly, probably helps them from a PR standpoint. You obviously don't have that big lag of fans building up that criticism of maybe the model and City's reluctance to spend significant amounts of money, because they've very quickly moved on to somebody else who Norwich fans can now get quickly excited about. I think you raise a good point about the level of MLS and the number of games. It is quite a jump, not just from a sort of quality standpoint, because obviously it's worth remembering Norwich are in the second tier, so it's not like there would be a huge gulf in quality, but the styles of football, if you've ever watched MLS, it's vastly different to that of the Championship. So that adaptation maybe would have been a slight issue. I see it personally as a much smaller gap in styles between South American leagues and the Championship. I think a lot of people assume that because it's from a part of the world where maybe flamboyant or flair players are lauded and there's a lot come out of there, people assume that they're sort of soft leagues and that the pace is slow, but they can be ferocious at times. The referees are, should we say, lenient at best. So I think that's a market where Norwich can shop from and be sure that players will be up to the physicality. And I think it probably overall, considering financial package, experience and quality, it probably suits them better than the Kone deal, to be honest.
Just to jump in, Adam, sorry, but the only sort of previous example that I can think of, there may be others, is that Middlesbrough signed a player called Martin Pereiro last summer from Argentina, who did kind of struggle to adapt a little bit. He's now back out on loan to Boca Juniors. So it can show there can be difficulty when you're kind of plucking someone not just out of a different country, but out of a completely different continent and completely different way of life. And I would imagine Norwich have obviously been building up their knowledge of that region, I would imagine, but also probably stepping up their work in terms of providing an environment that these players, these people can step into and feel confident in kind of going to work every day. So I'm sure they will have done work around and planning around integrating these players into their dressing room and into the Championship more generally. So that's a really interesting example of maybe where a South American recruit hasn't worked, having come into the Championship. I think Norwich City will be hoping to prove, obviously, that they can find a couple that can.
And that is why #NoCircus is more, a better phrase than here we go. If Paddy Davitt is the man when it comes to transfers incoming. I'll come back to you, Connor, just quickly. Obviously, in terms of incomings, Dean Smith said that Norwich City are still looking at certain positions. Obviously, we know this midfield slot has kind of opened up a little bit due to the departure of Pierre Lees-Malou. Just in terms of those positions, has anything changed in terms of the sort of positions that Norwich City are targeting this summer in terms of incomings, to your knowledge?
No, not really. I think they would like a winger. I'm not really sure how they would go about financing that, if I'm completely honest. But then I'm not really sure about how they're going about financing Nunez at this stage, given after Sarah, it was pretty much put to me that was essentially the budget gone, not all of it. And obviously that's probably subsequently been topped up by Pierre Lees-Malou. Obviously you can be creative around doing things such as borrowing against parachute payments, but Norwich have always been averse to that in the past. There's obviously this kind of investment talk in the background as well, shareholding talk in the background as well. So we don't know if that's provided any kind of lift. We don't understand that to be the case at this point. So that's interesting. I think, to be honest, it was interesting today to hear Dean Smith say that Norwich will be, Daniel Farke used to say awake a lot, would be awake to the end of the window. And it was interesting that he kind of repeated that today. So I think if something popped up that made financial sense and that was possible, then I think they would be willing. obviously at the moment getting that third midfield option is third midfield signing is a priority. I think they would like to do something in an attacking area. You look at that right side, doesn't really feel like there's a natural option there at the moment when you've got Rashica on the left. They've obviously got Hernandez in that position, Sargent, who else? I suppose Todd could play out there, Daniel Sinani could play out there, but they haven't really got anyone that we look at and go, yep, he's an absolute shoo-in for that area of the pitch. So I could see them looking in that area. I don't think they'll do a centre-back unless maybe Ben Gibson's injury turns out to be significantly worse than they thought, which again, I don't think is the case, or Grant Hanley picked up an injury. So I can't really see them doing anything there. Obviously, we've got the right-back situation. Dean Smith's fairly confident that Max Aarons will stay. That's the same for Milo Rashica as well, who confirmed there have been no inquiries for so far this summer. But with those two, it feels like for as long as there's a transfer window and it's open, there's going to be speculation and kind of talk around those two. So I think there'll probably have to be a wait to those. But no, the two real ones I see are a central midfield and then possibly a winger if they can finance it. But beyond that, I don't see them doing too much else, to be honest, unless, as I said, the world's aligned and something pops up that makes financial sense for them.
Yeah, it would appear that a lot of the transfer business will be sort of slightly influenced by in terms of the outgoings. Obviously, as you just referenced, Dean Smith pretty much said that there's been no bids for Milot Rashica so far. Sam, you may be surprised at the lack of kind of interest surrounding players that have in the Norwich City camp already, that, you know, there's maybe not been bids put on the table or interest that's really been firm from other clubs for maybe the likes of Max Aarons or Milo Rashica, the sort of slightly better players maybe naturally in that team.
Not really, because of two reasons. First is that the market is probably at its least active, especially towards the, out of the elite clubs at the moment. It's very dry. You look at the factors over the last couple of years. The pandemic obviously had an enormous impact, and the Championship is nowhere near a wash of money. You look at in the Premier League last year, Norwich spent probably the most they've ever spent in the summer transfer window, and were still accused of not giving it a go. Now they come to the Championship and they've spent less than 20 million, even if Nunez comes in, and they're being accused by some Championship fans of buying the league, and that's the chasm between the elite clubs and the rest, really. And let's be honest, Milo Rashica and Max Aarons are two of Norwich's top most talented players, but they're not going to be attracting the elite clubs. I'd also say it's worth pointing out not every club is as smart with their recruitment and as in-depth and open to maybe alternative opportunities as Norwich are. And for that reason, if they're looking for a more obvious, easy way of scouting, they're not going to go looking in a team that's just finished with 22 points for gems to add to their team. And I think that's definitely relevant. Also, Max Aarons, I'm sure will end up achieving quite a lot with his career. Clearly a quality player, very talented, but he didn't have a great season last season, in all honesty. And it feels maybe like he's hit a little bit of a plateau. And I think that's why a lot of people were saying he needs to move on from Norwich. But unfortunately, that fact means it's going to be more difficult for him to do so. Rashica, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some maybe German interest before the end of the window. But worth reiterating, Dean Smith did say in his press conference, no offers for Rashica. Pretty clearly stated that there wasn't too much interest in him at all. So he also spoke up how ready he feels he is to feature for Norwich. So if those two players are committed to playing in a yellow and green shirt, although I'm sure they'll be, as Connor put it earlier, awake to any potential departures. If they're committed to giving their all in a yellow and green shirt, then it won't be a problem for Norwich. And they've managed to do some pretty significant business without offloading those players. So I think it may be, although probably not the ideal situation, it does work out a little bit for all parties if they were to remain.
So yeah, we've got a whole month still, just over a month still to go in the transfer window. So there can be a lot still happening in terms of incomings and outgoings. That will wrap that up, sort of the transfer stuff. If you have any transfer related questions, just drop it in the comments and we'll come around to it towards the end of the show. But I'm going to move on to the Cardiff game. Obviously, we're making that journey down to a lovely place called Swindon tonight to stay in our hotel ahead of the trip to Cardiff tomorrow. Connor, how excited are you for this season? Obviously, last season we all know was really, really difficult and quite grueling towards the end, and we all just kind of wanted that season to be over. But has maybe the optimism grown? Obviously, we have got the 2 new signings in Gabriel Sarah and Isaac Hayden, but both obviously not going to be featuring definitely in the starting 11 tomorrow. Sarah potentially might be involved on the bench. Smith sort of said that's going to be a late decision on him today. So how are you sort of approaching this one? Obviously, Cardiff are a little bit of an unknown quantity. Anyone who's on the Pink and Plus app can go back and watch my Terrace Talk video yesterday with Daniel Bevan, which was really, really insightful. 13 signings Cardiff have made, so we don't really know exactly how they're going to shape up. But yeah, just optimism, Connor. Give us some optimism. Are you excited? Oh, you're on mute, mate.
There we go. I'm that excited. I forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, I am excited actually, because I think, and it's the same with fans really. Whenever a new season comes around, you do think positively about it, and you think about what it could be. And I've actually written a column on this today. For me, it kind of feels like kind of a bit of an unknown step for Norwich in a league that they've done very well in the past, because there are still a lot of question marks around them, and sometimes that can get blown up a little bit more internally. And by internally, I mean inside Norfolk amongst Norwich fans, with us, than perhaps externally, where people are just saying, yeah, Norwich are going to win the league again. I think actually the reality is probably somewhere between the two. It's going to be interesting to see how certain things play out. Obviously, the stylistic thing that we've kind of been speaking about all pre-season, certain players stepping up, whether someone like Milo Rashica, for example, who was just spoken about, is the prime example of a player who should be absolutely tearing the championship up in terms of pedigree, in terms of quality, in terms of where he's been and what he's done with his career. And probably he's at a stage of his career where he needs to have that season. And no doubt someone somewhere will have told him about a certain little Argentinian midfielder who did exceptionally well and got a very big move off the back of a stunning championship season. So that's a possibility. So yeah, I am excited. As for tomorrow, I'm going to contradict myself here a little bit slightly and say that I think it's going to be a very tough game, actually. And Dean Smith, I thought, hit the nail on the head today, where he said in the Championship, you come up against so many different styles, far more varied than you do in the Premier League. You can play someone like Luton, who press you really high and are intense and try and stop you playing out, or you can play someone like Rotherham, who are predominantly very low block and want to hit you with more direct balls and have that kind of arm wrestle with you. You can play someone like in Swansea, who are going to be very possession based under Russell Martin this year. They're all very extreme examples. You get kind of variations and slight tweaks between those, but as a general rule of thumb, you can be facing one style one week and another one the next. And I think with this Cardiff team, because of the changes, I'm not really sure what they're going to do or how they're going to play. And I'm sure to an extent, probably Steve Morrison is sat maybe at Cardiff's training ground or at home or whatever, probably thinking the same thing, because in many ways, it may be a good time to play Cardiff because they don't have that kind of continuity, that cohesiveness between their side. But by the same token, we know how football works. Sometimes things can click straight away, or they can click very quickly initially and then sort of ease off a little bit. But you look at Norwich's record in the Championship. I was looking earlier. The first title-winning season under Daniel Farke, they won one of their first 6. In the second one, they won one of their first 4. They won the title both times. Under Alex Neil in 16-17, they lost once in their opening 12 games. Neil was sacked by March, and they finished outside the playoffs. So it's neither. It shows how much we can read into a good start. And by start, I'm probably looking at the first 10 games. I think the league begins to take shape a little bit thereafter. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I'm really intrigued to see how it all pulls together, how Norwich start, given all of the questions that we've had around playing style and creative void and lack of goal threat, particularly in Scotland, but also throughout pre-season, because actually those things can be completely irrelevant. They can be completely relevant, and we're going to find out very, very soon. So yeah, very excited. Glad that pre-season's out of the way. I think that Hibs game was enough for conclusion for anyone for pre-season to look ahead to the real stuff. So yeah, it's going to be good. I think just finally, my final point, if they can get a win tomorrow, it's not massive in terms of their season, because there's obviously going to be 45 games behind that. But in terms of the narrative around the place, I'm talking amongst fans and fans' relationships with the team and their perceptions of Dean Smith and some of the players, a win, it feels like is really important just to turn the page. And I cast my mind back to a couple of years ago where they went to Huddersfield on the opening day and ground out. It was a really ugly 1-0 win, actually, very un-Daniel Farker-esque. Adam Eder scored fairly late on, but it just helped turn the page. And even though that was a relatively slow start, it just kind of bought them a little bit of time. So that could be really important tomorrow, I think. So if they could just grind something out, that would be brilliant. I personally think it will be a tough game. I can see a draw written all over it, if I'm being honest. Let's see. But I don't think it's going to be dull this season, whatever happens.
Yeah, I find it interesting. Yesterday, speaking to the Cardiff fans, saying that he only really expects maybe 2 or 3 players from their last sort of team they fielded from the last game of the season to be in that starting 11 tomorrow. So that is going to be a complete refresh. And I said to him, it feels a little bit like that season when Norwich completely refreshed everything under Daniel Farker, and it just felt like it was a whole new 11 and nobody really knew what to expect. And I suppose that's the element of excitement that maybe that brings. But he kind of said that last season, towards the end, Cardiff were having to pump it long. They had to kind of stay with that mould that Mick McCarthy had built them at the start of the season, even under Steve Morrison then for the second half of the season. But they're going to bring something a little bit different to the party. But in terms of the Norwich City approach for tomorrow, Sam, obviously you've done that piece that's new on our Pinker Plus app in terms of the tactics boards, which looks a little bit more into sort of the analytical side of the game and obviously a starting 11. So how do you sort of see Smith approaching this game tomorrow in terms of, one, sort of the lineup, but two, kind of the tactical approach and the formation?
Yeah, I think the lineup is fairly easy to predict. I think there's maybe 2 positions in terms of midfield and on the wing that you could discuss. I think the back 5 is pretty nailed on. Tim Krul, Max Aarons, Andrew Omobamidele, Grant Hanley and Dimitris Yannoulis. If it's not that, I'll be very surprised, with the only slightly plausible change being potentially Angus Gunn, but I still see Tim Krul starting. I think midfield is where it's probably most up for debate, and I had Kenny McLean at the base with Daniel Sinani and Todd Cantwell as sort of advanced 8s. I'm not 100% certain on that at all. I think that there's very much potential for Jakob Sorensen to come in as the sort of 6 and Kenny McLean to push alongside Todd Cantwell as one of those 8s. But even more sort of mysterious for me going into the game is that right wing position. I think Josh Sargent is clearly a player that Dean Smith likes. There are a lot of long balls going into him against Celtic, and his pressing was clearly a big strength, but his technical quality it's not great. And you don't, as a footballer, you don't get to that level without having technical quality. So I suggest maybe it's more of a mentality thing, maybe keeping a cool head in the final third and when in advanced situations. But that is a problem, and for that reason, I think that position is up for debate. He's obviously got John Rowe. Ono Hernandez was probably the only player to emerge from that Hibernian game with any sort of credit, so he'd like to be in the mix, I'm sure. So they've got a few options there. Maybe none of them stand out, especially with Milo Rashica pretty much nailed on to be starting on the left. So I am interested to see where he goes with those 2 positions. I'd suggest Todd Cantwell and Kenny McLean are almost dead certs to start for me. But I think it's that other midfield position and on the right. I think tactically, yeah, it's going to be really difficult because I was speaking to, consulted Birmingham Live journalist Ashley Preece. He covered Dean Smith's Aston Villa side, and he sort of spoke about how Smith was almost defined by his pragmatism and his ability to switch depending on the system he was coming up against. And he has no idea, just like the rest of us, what system he's going to be coming up against tomorrow. So he's going to have to be proactive with it. I think that's a situation where maybe Daniel Farker would have had an advantage because he wanted to do the same thing pretty much every game until the last few of his reign at Carrow Road. So it's going to be interesting because I think this is an opportunity, without being able to assess what he's coming up against. This is probably an opportunity for Norwich fans to see what Dean Smith is going to try and do without all those factors in play. This is going to be his footballing ideology pretty much. And I'm excited to find out what that is. But you'd suggest that in any game in the Championship, the balance of probability is that Norwich will have more possession. So hopefully he's got a couple of tricks up his sleeve to increase that productivity and that creativity in the sort of advanced areas, because they definitely need to improve on that. So I think, his ability to find ways to unlock the Cardiff defence and get Timu Pukki in on goal, that's going to play a huge part in whether Norwich can be successful tomorrow or not.
Notoriously, obviously, Norwich are a bit slow starters in the Championship, but I did look at the stats. I think Norwich have won 7 of their last 10 games against Cardiff. So if anyone wants a little bit of optimism, then that's probably a good one to cling on to. Probably glad that we're not playing Fulham on the opening day, because I think we'd all been writing an L next to Norwich City's first fixture before we'd even kicked off. We'll just delve into the comments. Any sort of last comments you want to get in will be live for about another 5 or so minutes. I'll just bring this one up, Connor. Obviously, you put this in our group chat just before we came on air. Adam Eder is in the under-21s team today, so does that mean that he will not be making the trip to Wales? Do you sort of have any insight on that one, or do you expect him to still be maybe in amongst that substitutes bench?
I don't see it. I don't see it if he's playing at this stage on a Friday afternoon. I don't really see how he's involved unless it's obviously on the bench. But with Hugill and Sargent fit, I imagine that affords Adam Eder just a little bit more time to get up to speed. Obviously, Dean Smith said on the Scotland trip that he was about 3 weeks away, so it makes sense for him to be playing in this game and getting 60, 70, 80, 90 minutes rather than perhaps 10 that he'd have got at Cardiff, which isn't particularly beneficial for him at this stage where he is kind of physically. So I don't see him involved tomorrow. Obviously, Norwich have the luxury now, as do all Championship clubs, of making 5 subs in a game, which, we could get into this debate and go down a rabbit hole talking about it. But on the surface, you would say, given the depth and quality, obviously relative to the Championship of Norwich's squad, that provides them with a little bit of an advantage and offers players like Adam Eder, Jordan Hugill as well. I wrote a piece about that earlier in the summer. Probably a bit more of a likelihood to play than it would have if under the free sub rule, where perhaps you're relatively limited in terms of the options you could bring on. But no, I don't see him being involved tomorrow. For example, John Rowe isn't playing. I would expect him to be involved in the squad tomorrow. Springett is obviously out injured as well, which is the other one that we'd have been looking for. So I think you can take for that he won't be travelling. I actually watched the club have put up a video of training, one of their training videos before games, and he looks like he's really kind of physically, top half physically come on in terms of his development. Looks really powerful and strong now. And we did see glimpses of kind of encouraging hold-up play at Hibs, but even so, I thought he looked quite short in terms of where he was physically, and this will help that. So no, I don't see him at Cardiff tomorrow. I think with Hugill, Sargent and Pukki, albeit probably Sargent starting on the right, they have enough attacking options there to go with until Adam Eder is back in the fold fully.
Let's bring up Daniel Wright's comment. He was quite sort of pleased to see that Smith's words on Rashica Sam, obviously a man that we all know is, maybe sort of had those glimpses last season, but maybe struggled across the board to really make it consistent. But if Norwich can retain him for the Championship, is he maybe the star man this season that maybe propel them to the Championship, potentially a promotion or maybe a title win again, a little bit in sort of a similar vein to what Emi Buendia done last time out in the Championship?
Yeah, he's definitely got the quality. You just look at what he achieved in Germany, and he's held in enormously high regard in those parts and the sort of clubs he was linked with. Obviously, Dean Smith wanted to bring him to Aston Villa at one stage. There are also maybe slightly more tenuous links with the likes of Liverpool. And he's achieved a lot at the highest level. And it's not like that's completely gone away. As you said, it was nowhere near as consistent as it needed to be, but there were definitely signs of that sort of thing in a Norwich shirt last season. And, as far as that parallel to Buendia and his influence in the 2021 campaign, he had a pretty inconsistent Premier League season going into that. He scored 1 goal and there was a long wait for that, I remember as well. So maybe if he's got the right mentality, which, according to Smith, he definitely does, and he's come back, with the right idea in terms of performing in a Norwich shirt, then I think he can absolutely achieve. It's also about the system, and you look at Teemu Pukki, and arguably Norwich's best player, definitely up there, and he's struggled during pre-season, doesn't look totally right for the system. I think it's a similar situation with Milo Rashica, and we actually had a discussion. I don't think it was on camera, but Connor referenced the fact that you've got Rashica on the left who wants to counter-attack into space. Teemu Pukki, who wants to be part of a possession-heavy side and have balls slid through one-on-one. And Josh Sargent, who's based on pressing. So there is a little bit of a contradiction there. I don't know if the same side can get the best out of Milo Rashica and Teemu Pukki at the same time. But I think if one of them's fit and firing to close to 100%, then that's going to be an enormous asset for Norwich going forward. So I think, I think if the system's around him and he's got the right mentality, as Dean Smith has claimed he is, I think he could be a huge player. Definitely on his day, far too good for the Championship based on what he's achieved in his career and what he's done previously.
And to round off the show, I'm going to put you two boys on the spot. Score prediction for tomorrow. Obviously, you said draw earlier in this broadcast, Connor, but are you going to stick with that? And what you sort of actually going to put down for a score?
I am going to go 1-1. I think Norwich will fall behind and hopefully come back. And I think in many ways, even that would provide a little bit of optimism. But to be honest, I just think obviously Cardiff in massive transition. Nobody really knows what to expect. No doubt they're going to have a home crowd who buys into that kind of fresh start narrative of things. Steve Morrison, as we've already spoken about, wants to play a more progressive style of play than perhaps they did last year. Going to be interesting to see how Norwich come up against that. But what I think it will do actually is going to be one of those rare games where they're going to play a team who probably wants to enjoy a bit of possession. So I think Norwich might get some joy on the counter actually on this occasion, which might, if we kind of look at pre-season, again, how much you want to read into that is up to you. But you look at the Marseille game where they were at their best, a lot of their work was on the counter. So if that's the case, that then maybe Norwich will have a better afternoon than perhaps many are expecting. But I can just see two teams very early days cancelling each other out and it ending with a 1-1 draw. That's kind of what I think. But fingers crossed it'll be a bit more positive and maybe a 2-1 win for Norwich and they can snatch a winner.
I'll throw over to you, Sam. Same question.
Yeah, I think I've said 1-1 on previous recordings, so poor from Connor there, stealing that.
You want to be a bit more original, Sam? Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't see past a very average attritional Championship battle at this stage in terms of the stages that both clubs are at. Obviously, Cardiff in transition, Norwich maybe slightly more sure of what they are, but coming off a relegation, absolutely zero momentum behind that club at the moment. So yeah, I struggle to see them working up an incredible fixture that's going to be remembered for decades, as is usually the case on opening day. But yeah, I can't see Norwich losing. I also can't see them winning really. Also, I'm there. We're all there, so it's bound to be drab, which is, you know, that's always sort of been my rule as somebody that hasn't attended matches too often, as somebody that's now going to be covering them week in, week out, sometimes twice a week. It's going to be a very dull season based on my predictions and what they're going to be. But yeah, no, I can't see beyond an extremely Championship affair, and I'm going to have to go for 1-1 as well. Although, let it be on the record that you go back, listen to the Pinkham podcast, I think I went for 1-1, maybe even a couple of days ago. So there we are.
Adam, what are you going with?
You know, I'm going to bring a bit of positivity so the fans will come back and watch us, because you two are far too negative. I'm going to buck the trend and say a grind out a 1-0 win is going to be exactly the same as that Huddersfield opener a few years back. Norwich City are going to strike late and it's going to be a Grant Hanley header from a corner. So you heard it.
Optimism. Grinding out a 1-0 with a Grant Hanley header.
That's exactly the sort of optimism that we need.
We'll take it. We're not being fussy. We'll take it.
I think that'll do. That'll round up this broadcast. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, lots of really, really great content across the Pinkham and the Pinkham Plus app at the moment. Obviously, Sam's got his tactical video up there. That's well worth a watch tonight ahead of this big trip to Cardiff. I done the preview yesterday with the Cardiff City fan. Obviously, we've got the Dean Smith press conference from today. If you haven't got to see all of this broadcast, it's well worth going back. Obviously, we've discussed all the transfer-related lines as well, and lots of really great content coming, obviously, as well, because us three will all be at the Cardiff City Stadium tomorrow. No Paddy this week. He's on his holiday, so I'm sure he's deserving a much deserved break. So fingers crossed that Norwich City can grind out a win, and if they do, then we're blaming Paddy and he's never allowed back. So thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. If you're travelling down to Cardiff tomorrow, obviously have a safe trip down there. Obviously, it's a long old journey, and fingers crossed Norwich City can bring home 3 points.